All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the number one fastest growing life insurance podcast on the planet. We got Dom, we got Austin, you got myself, and we're going to be continuing our review of Becoming Your Own Banker, the book that R. Nelson Nash wrote that very much became a pioneer on how you use life insurance, how you pay yourself back with interest, you create capital for your family, and you ultimately take banking, which is a very profitable business in the world, and you apply that in your family, and you create ripples. And I think we talked last week about part one. Lots of great things covered there. And if you've not watched that, make sure to go back and we covered part one. And in today's episode, we're going to be covering part two of this book. And what I love about part two, outside of the last chapter in part two, it's all about mindset. All about mindset, all about mindset. There's some gems here. And I think, like anything, learning these, understanding the principle, and then applying that principle is going to be super key. And so, Dom, we're going to start off with you, my man, and just get your overall take before we go chapter by chapter. But what were some of the big takeaways that you had when you were just reading part two?
Amazing. So I actually really loved this part personally for the beginning of the mindset, but also when you started talking about some of the life insurance stuff too. I really loved some of the language that was used. So I think this is going to be a great segment to talk about chapter by chapter and some of the benefits and what he says. I would have loved if this would have been the first part of the book personally. Yeah. It seems like that it would be more fitting to get people in the right mindset of why, so on and so forth, and then start getting into more of the conceptual pieces of the banking system afterwards. But, you know, even though that wasn't the case, that's okay.
It does feel like it's just a hodgepodge of like yeah. You almost like if Nelson was still alive and I could have asked him this question, I'd be like, Nelson, I know in hindsight sometimes it's all 2020 and we're going to make like this is a great book, but like why did you put it in a certain way? I'm sure he would have a reason, because remember that this was a 10-hour course, and so maybe it's like hook them with some of the key banking ideas, but then let's go to the mindset before we get into the illustrations. But sometimes I sometimes scratch my head. I'm like, okay, I wonder why this was put here. So I'm with you, Dom. That was one of the things that I was thinking about and wondered if some of these stories should have ended up in part one. But again, I'm sure Nelson has a reason for everything. And
yeah, no, I agree. And the best part about this chapter is like it's not just about the infinite banking concept. It's just life, and that's what I really loved. And sound money principles and life principles, and there's some really good nuggets that we can take away through each chapter that I'm excited to talk about and dive deeper into. So overall, love the chapter. Wish it would have been first, and yeah, I don't want to go too much into depth besides that right now.
Austin, in part one, if you had a couple big takeaways as you're reading, what were some of the things that hit you in, sorry, I said part one, part two of Becoming Your Own Banker?
No worries. Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So I think he does a good job labeling it in an early 2000s way in the title. And we say mindset. Mindset is kind of the buzzword of nowadays. He calls it the human problems. And ultimately, these are all the hangups that prevent people from either seeing the value in the strategy, or from, even if they understand the value in the strategy, being able to implement it long term. Because there are some shortcomings that we have as humans. There are some ways that we are short-sighted that ultimately are like a stumbling block to ourselves that we're going to trip over, and we have to be aware of them if we are to overcome it. And so that's really what he's laying out over this part is, you know, what is it that it comes natural to you that you're going to have to resist in order to successfully implement this. Now, he kind of touched on that a little bit in the last part. If you recall the whole analogy with the grocery store, you know, we have this natural inclination to go out the back door, right? And like you have to resist that, because ultimately you're stealing from yourself when you do that. And he does touch on the idea of theft in here as well, although in a different way. But there's just a lot of things in here where it's like, you know, you have to have a certain way of thinking and seeing the world, and a certain way of moving through your financial life if you're going to be able to make steady progress towards the goal of being your own bank and of creating your own banking system. So that's ultimately kind of what I was picking out of this chapter is like, what do I have to overcome in myself if I'm going to have like long-term financial success.
Yeah, those are great points. Really I really appreciate what he wrote in just these chapters, and it's cool because a lot of these points and rereading them, I'm like, I've really applied some of this stuff to my life. Like the Parkinson's law. How many people do we know the more that they make, they just start spending more? And it's like once you experience a luxury, it becomes something that we need all of a sudden. And that's like you we get sometimes super analytical, but that's just like a human behavior that you just need to be aware of and like nip in the bud. And so like that's an aspect. And also I was thinking about you, Dom, from just an operation standpoint. If we say that it's going to take a month, takes a month. It's normally things don't happen faster. And so it's almost like even in running a business, how do we create almost constraints that make things move along? And I almost think in your personal finances, how can you purposely create constraints in your life that by default help you? And a constraint would be that you're going to pay yourself at market rate interest back to your family. It's like, well, why would I pay my family or myself interest and almost like create more friction, and you end up buying less because you have more friction? And it's like, well, actually in the long run, that friction is good. And so sometimes the ease of money is not necessarily a great thing. It's super easy to use a credit card. Where has that led most people? And so that's been great. I also the Willie Sutton's law. It's like just the philosophy. I know that lots of people are going to get triggered by this, but the philosophy of qualified plans, the philosophy of the government saying, hey, we have a problem called income tax you're trying to get out that we've created. We're going to give you a way out. It's like just the idea of like they potentially will take that money eventually. And I was at an event recently, and someone was the idea of Roths came up. And just for the record, I'm not anti-Roth, and I'm not anti-Roth at all. I know that some people might get triggered by that. I think a Roth IRA is a great approach. But there was someone that made a really good argument to say, listen, like I just don't trust the philosophy of the Roth IRA. Like I believe they will take our money eventually. And they reference Nelson's book. And so it's just, again, we can get all technical, which leads to the arrival syndrome of like a lot of times people want to be like, no, that's not how it works. And it's like there's something to say about the older that you get, just being like, let's look at history. Let's not just take what they're saying today. Like let's look at what other empires that have fallen, like the cycle that they went into, and the fact you can't say that this is impossible, because if we get to a place and there's democracy and people can vote in what they want, and people could be like, well, is it fair that Peter Thiel has millions of dollars in his Roth? Like we should take that money. And it's like, well, when you have people that can, when you have a group of people that can potentially change the rules through voting, nothing is quote unquote guaranteed. So that was interesting. I think the golden rule is just a classic. Those who have the gold make the rules. Excited to talk more about that. And then just the use it or lose it. This is where I agree, but also I have some potential disagreements with some of the bridge that Nelson takes, like use it or lose it. And then it's like I hear a lot of people. It's like that's the justification why you should use your infinite banking policy at all cost. We can talk about that. And then it feels like chapter 10 is out of place, just being honest, like it's just like, okay, all the mindset, now we're going to talk about creating an entity, but chapter, like the last part is creating the foundation for the next couple parts of the book. And so overall, it was exciting. It was exciting and a great read.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Amazing. Let's go ahead and jump into the chapters. I think this will be a great segment. I think we can get after it and have some fun.
Cool. So the human problems, Parkinson's law, and the famous quote is, work expands to meet the time enveloped allowed, and then a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. And then another thing that was taken is expenses rise to equal income, and you must overcome this daily. Dom, what was talk to me about this chapter?
Yeah, here's the thing. I try to be very objective about reality and looking at real life versus putting things in a box. And I actually think Parkinson's law has some benefits. And I know most people probably aren't thinking of it that way when they first read it, but like you mentioned, from a business perspective, if we give a week, then it'll take a week. So instead of giving it a week, like, why not give it 30 minutes, right? And if you can use that as a tool, as Parkinson's, knowing that Parkinson's law exists, then it's just like any other financial product. It's not good or bad. It's just a tool. You know it exists, and then use it accordingly. Now, on the other side, where you understand that, as you make more money, you spend more money, that's how a tool can be used in a very negative way. And if we understand that and then can fight that urge, which comes down to human emotion, greed, and where the heart's at, then we can essentially come on the other side in a very positive manner. So for me, I think Parkinson's law is a great thing to be aware of. It could be used as a tool. It can also be a very negative thing if you let it control you.
What is a practical thing that someone could take as just like what practically would you recommend someone take around like the Spencer's rise to equal income and luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity? Like, is there a tangible takeaway that we can help our clients, or if someone's listening to this, be like, okay, great point. What can I do about it to make sure that I nip it in the bud?
I think you have to start. It's so cliche, but with the end in mind of what it is that you really want out of life. And you have to have conversations with your spouse, your kids, the people in your family tree, and really determine what's important and valuable to you. Because by nature, you just may think the typical American white picket fence is the thing that we should strive for. So therefore, as you make more money, you buy a bigger house, you make more money, you buy a bigger car, you make more money, your expenses go up, and you try to keep up with the Joneses. But if you really sit down and reflect, and you really go over what it is you want out of life, you'll come to find out that it has more to do with abundance, more to do with education, more to do passing down from generation to generation, more so from a growth probably perspective that creates a lot of fulfillment, giving back more to your community. And by doing so, you need to shrink the expense side while you continue to increase the revenue side to create abundance. And if you never get to that place where you're thinking abundantly and going above and beyond with the revenue but decreasing the expenses, you'll always be a slave essentially to quote unquote the man, to yourself, overspending.
So Dom, you're
debt.
mainly camping on the mindset. I hear what 100%. I hear from you. Okay.
Yeah, that's everything. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll disagree with that, but I want to hear, Austin, your thoughts. So Nelson, later in this book, he says, if you can whip Parkinson's law, you will win by default because your peers can't do it. How do we go about this? And again, mindset's important, but like how would you go about this in your own life, Austin? And how do you help other people whip Parkinson's law?
So I'll start with an analogy to something that's happening in the world, and then I'll bring it back in. So interesting. So the first part of Parkinson's law, that work expands to meet the time envelope allowed. There is a basilica in Spain. It's called La Sagrada. It's been being built for like over 120 years. Like, it has been in the process of being built for that long. And granted, there was some pretty grand sort of vision that kind of started it being built, but it has like, there are multiple different ages worth of like artistic representation on the outside, and there's never like a time deadline, right, of when it needed to be finished. Contrast that with something like if you've ever seen like work being done on highways or whatnot. Usually the work occurs at night because in the morning, when like at like 6 a.m. or whatever, when like traffic starts to pick up, there's like this fine that will be assessed on them if they continue work past the time that they're allotted, right? And so, if you don't have any sort of a time frame on when something needs to get done, it could take 120 years. If you do have a time frame and you do limit yourself, you probably can get it done in a reasonable amount of time. So, my question is, how do we go about doing this to ourselves? How do we go about, if you can get this, the rest of the world can't? The answer is probably not very sexy. It's probably going to involve just a lot of willpower. And there's going to be times when your friends are buying things and you're not. There's going to be times when it's just like, you're like, oh man, we're driving home in the car and we could go to a restaurant. We could go do something and we could, push the budgetary limit this month a little bit as a family. or we could just go home and eat some of the leftovers that we already have in our fridge, right? Is that I think there's going to be a lot of times where the decision is going to seem small in the moment, but if you compound those over a month and over a year and over 10 years, it's going to make a big difference. Like if you just have I'm going to do whatever I feel like in the moment mentality, you're not going to be able to resist Parkinson's law, because in the moment, you are going to be hungry, you're going to be thirsty, you're going to like the way, the luxury looks, right?
Caleb, I would love to
stuff.
hear your Caleb, because Austin and I seem like we're talking a lot about
Yeah,
the
yeah,
mindset side of
you
things,
guys are
right?
in the fluffy
So
clouds right now.
I would love to hear
Okay.
you, just to bring it back
Yeah,
to what you're
so
going to disagree with or whatever the case
yeah,
is.
so here's mindset's huge. So I'm not going to discount mindset, but I think sometimes we can get too high on our own supply when it comes to mindset, and mindset becomes the convenient thing that we always go to. And so one of the things is, when you track it, you control it. I really do believe that. When you can start tracking numbers, you have more ownership, and there's accountability that are tied to that. There have been people that I've known that they have accountability groups where every time they meet, they go over their balance sheet and their cash flow tracking. And by default, you don't even necessarily need to make goals, but if you track these things ongoing, you start seeing patterns, and you have to be accountable for what you're spending. This is an example that Dom and I went through. As a company, we track what people are spending, and you have to account for, you have to like stand by that. And that might change someone's behavior on like, hey, knowing that I'm going to have eyeballs on this, I may think differently when I spend money. And so I think creating a practical system that's tracking cash flow is really important. There's another tool out there called Currents that we're going to be starting to use in some of the ways that we help clients. And what they do is they almost separate a bank account where your money comes in and then where it goes out. And their whole default is, what usually happens is the more money you make, you just spend more. And so what they're saying is, if you can lower your spending rate versus what you're making, by default you'll win over time. But their whole deal is like, you can have all the mindset in the world, but you actually need to set up a system to recapture some of that. Yes, I said that word, recapture. But as a default, like over time, you're creating friction to make it harder to spend, versus right now it's like the default. Last thing I'll say is accountability is practically setting up accountability, whether it's with a spouse, whether it's with the coach, whether it's with an advisor, whether it's publicly. There's someone I know that publicly tracks their portfolio in front of everybody, and you better believe they have a different energy. So I love mindset, but these are like some practical things that are like mindset, and to, I think, really hit the Parkinson's law. Because even myself, I think I'm pretty frugal, and I think I have some good mindsets, but these tools have helped me become more aware, because we can have the mindset, but these tools create accountability that I think are really practical to help people get to the next level. So I don't know your take on those, but it's not a disagreement. It's just like a mindset, yes, but let's focus on the tracking.
Amazing. So you were going from a real tangible, what can somebody do to actually improve Parkinson's laws, versus just like the headspace of it. So one, I agree. You obviously can't improve if you don't actually take real action. And I think that's sometimes where people do get in the fluffy clouds for too long, where they stay there and they never take any action. I also think as a society, what we've actually done is we've got so numb to the idea of quote unquote mindset that we almost just forgot about how important it actually is. So like, you actually go through like these swings of life. We could talk about this from gender equality. We could talk about politics. We could talk about a lot of things where things start from one extreme, then they go to the complete, the other side of the extreme. And I think we've done that with the whole personal development mindset thing, where that was such a big focus like 10, 20 years ago, where you had all the Tony Robbins, those books. So people are like so focused on the headspace. And then nobody takes action. So then it's like, well, okay, now action's important. And then so on and so forth, you stop doing so. Now I think it's the other side, where people are so numb to social media, so numb to the idea of actual mindset, that they're like, they don't actually ever get anything done, period. So I do agree with you, but I still think like it's so important. And it actually hit me even harder the other day when I was in church, and the pastor talked about literally our headspace and mindset of the things we think about literally control the activities that we do. And it's literally this far away from sin creeping at the door, from essentially creating generational curses, just like the story of we're down going the whole thing with Abe and Cain and Abel, where Cain essentially killed Abel because his headspace was just like in a place of like distraught because I didn't serve the Lord well, and ended up killing his brother because of it. That's a whole crazy thing, right? But when I talk about this from this perspective with infinite banking and Parkinson's law, I do think all the things that I mentioned before is super important, because Austin talked about willpower, and I think willpower is fickle. And I think unless you have the conversations around what's important to you and what you value, you'll never actually have the quote unquote willpower, or you'll never actually create the systems that are important for you, right? And so that's why there is the two people of like the Vanderbilts versus the Rockefellers, because they did create the mind space, the education, and then they created the system. So yeah, I think that the system is super important, and that's the tangible piece of it that will actually make the generational changes. And I think that the books like Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and the books like The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, talking about paying yourself first, like the first 10, 20% should always go back essentially to yourself. And if that's essentially your banking system, that's amazing. And then you essentially use other tools like Currents, or shoot, a spreadsheet is great as well, just to essentially create more value in dollars to your household economy.
The richest man in Babylon was that was like my biggest takeaway, is a tenth of what you make is yours to keep, and pay yourself before you pay others. And I think that one takeaway is a great example of that. And not that Nelson said that in this chapter, but Parkinson's law, one of the arguments to be made around whole life insurance is you're physically setting up a system to make sure that you're paying yourself. And some of the same things that people could say that this is a negative, it's like, you have flexibility, but it's not as flexible as a savings account. It could be an asset long-term, because you're creating a system to literally a bill to pay yourself. It's kind of little, and it's, sometimes I love flexibility, but flexibility could be a problem. And, there's a lot that we could talk about that. Austin, do you have any takes before we go on to the next chapter, Willie Sutton's?
No, I think we hit them all. I don't think I have any extra takes. I think that I think willpower, I think mindset, I think even lastly systems. I think obviously you need to have all three of those working in concert with each other in order to kind of effectuate any change, right? And so I think everything that we talked about is probably equally important.
Okay.
The last thing that I will mention that was talked about in here that we didn't talk about yet, because I think for the reader that's like, they may not understand what does that mean, and maybe you guys have a different take on it. But he talks about the rule. Remember Rule 6, right? And he said, hey, like, don't take yourself too seriously. And like when you first read it, you're like, well, what does he essentially mean? Like my takeaway from what that means is that ego and pride and things like overconfidence can essentially get in your way from essentially creating something significant like this, and creating a family foundation and headspace, mindset, systems, all the things that we're talking about. And so I think ego and pride is the downfall of all man. And I think that that's essentially, it's like, hey, don't take yourself so seriously. Like, it's okay that we let go of some of those things and we start implementing some other things that are going to be more beneficial to you.
I totally agree. And I also felt like, Nelson, why wasn't that in the chapter of the arrival syndrome? I don't know, that seems like it's like, hey, don't take yourself so serious. We're all gonna die. No one's gonna remember you in 200 years. Like, chill. And I think it's, maybe it's the start of like this whole section to say like, hey, we're gonna go through some human behaviors. So I wanted to make a take on that, and I'm grateful that you brought that up. I just didn't know like how that tied into Parkinson's law, but I think it's a great mental model that I go back to when I'm like reading YouTube comments of people that are hating on me, and I'm like, yeah, okay, relax. I'm not that important. And usually when you think you're important, that's when ego becomes an enemy of yours. So appreciate you mentioning that. And I think there's some really truth in that is take yourself less seriously, and you'll actually be more happy and probably more wealthy as a result.
Amen.
Okay, dude, Pastor Dom. Starting this thing off with a banger. All right, so Willie Sutton stole money from the banks when asked why. It's like, well, that's where the money's at. So here's some of the takeaways I got from the chapter, and then Austin, we're going to start with you after this.
Yeah.
So I wrote down, wherever wealth is accumulated, someone will try to steal it. Nelson alludes to the IRS being the biggest thief in the world. The government is a parasite. Very interesting take. When taxation becomes onerous to a point where the government officials sense rebellion, they will always resort to exceptions to the rule. Interesting. And then he writes this: the lawmakers create a problem by spending money that they don't have, which results in straggling taxation, and then they create a solution to form an exception to the rule they created. And the natural result of such a process is a system in which the government controls everything you do. And then he goes on to say they can and will change their minds upon the slightest whim of times. He also takes a jab at the income tax was 1913. So there's certain things that predate that. And then he ends the chapter by saying, this is best solved by people freely contracting with one another with government limitations to function and enforcing those contracts. Sorry, I misread that. So he best solved by people freely contracting with one another with a government limited to enforcing those contracts. And that's very consistent with Nelson's take on just how politics work. There's a lot here, and there might be some things that I did not mention in that summary of chapter 6. But Austin, take it away on
this one. And ultimately, like, once again, what we talked about in our previous video is you have to like zoom out, look at everything he is saying, because if you zoom too much in on any one thing, it's easy to really get lost in the weeds. Because even this morning, as I was doing prep for what we were going to talk about today, I got really deep in the weeds on something, even a little bit yesterday, that ultimately it was really fun to research. It wasn't entirely like in line with what he was talking about, because what he's talking about, like, and it really, my point of contention comes down to the way he characterizes the IRS and taxation and theft, because you really hear his libertarianness coming through strong. He's a fiscal libertarian through and through. And libertarians are like, for those of you who don't know, they're like further right of like conservatives. Like they believe in extremely limited government. They believe in like,
I would say there's a lot of libertarians that are
yes,
more liberal when it comes to social issues, but yes, fiscally, right.
Fiscally liberal is like government, it enforces contracts only. They really don't do anything else. Like it's really like, the transactions are really person to person, and the government really plays no part in that. And the reason why he's saying that is to set up everything he's saying about 401ks and qualified plans and how the government creates the problem and then tries to be part of the solution, which is a little bit backwards. I do think though that like, he does like make these he drops these like very blanket generalizations, and he doesn't really spend much time justifying them. So like when he says like, who's the biggest thief in the world? The Internal Revenue Service. It is, I guess it may be important just to realize is that like, that tax and taxation is a reality pretty much anywhere in the civilized world. Now, some places don't have income tax. There's a couple states that don't have income tax, and there's several countries that don't have income tax. But there has to be revenue for the government to function in some way, and it has to come from somehow it has to come from citizens. It either comes from our incomes, or in the past, it's come from tariffs. And right now we are experiencing what a heavy-handed tariff policy is like in this country. Or it has to come from the extraction of natural resources, which, depending on the way that that's done, could be its own form of ecological theft if you really want to go down the rabbit trail. So like taxation's, it's necessary. It's something that like ultimately I would not want to live in a society that doesn't have a centralized government. So ultimately, like, I'm glad that it's occurring, because ultimately I do think we need people to kind of arbitrate disputes between people, like the police and like the federal government. But I think it is important to realize that, yes, like, okay, it's important to have a centralized government. It's important to have these things. However, like, when it comes to your personal family finances, do you trust the government to provide an adequate solution to the problem of taxation? Because even if it's a necessary thing, I still think it is a problem, because you're taking money that would be part of your household economy and it's leaving it and it's never coming back. I actually go over this with clients in pretty much all of the clarity calls that I do. Is I say like, okay, I talk to them, hey, money only goes one of two places. It's either spent or it's saved. And taxes is I consider part of spent because it leaves your wallet and it never comes back. And so it's weird to think of taxes in that way, but like you're losing access to those dollars forever. And so what's the best way to not have to get involved in a system where you're going to continually be paying taxes every year? If you could create this alternative system of life insurance where it's not going to be taxed after it goes in because it predates the income tax law, like that's amazing. Now, Caleb, I want to talk with you about this. So it's important. And now I tell people, like, the people who ask, it's important to know that like this predates the income tax law, and once your dollars go in, they're not going to be taxed again. However, like you said, we live in a society where if we vote in people, we can get the rules changed. Now, ultimately, life insurance, I think it does fall prey to just like anything else in society. Like if there was a point in the future when enough people decided that they wanted to change the rules on life insurance, they could do it. But I think that they would be facing some stiff headwinds, just because
I
don't think it'd be a very popular thing.
anything technically could be possible.
Yeah.
And historically, there's been people that have been grandfathered in, and there would be a lot of other things that I think would come under attack before life insurance.
Yeah.
But it would be very hypocritical of us when we're talking about don't take us too seriously in the arrival syndrome. I can't ethically be like, this is impossible. It's like, you know what? Who am I? Who knows? I mean, if some people in the future get elected, they could go, they could maybe go that direction, but just know like it would be a lot harder, and you could very much make the argument that they're coming after private property and so I think we have bigger issues. Austin, I'm going to go through this quick with you because I just want to get your take. Do you believe wherever wealth is accumulated, someone will try to steal it? Do you like that mentality? Do you agree that that's a good mentality to have in the back of your head?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That
IRS is the biggest thief in the world. I would assume you don't agree with that.
No, no, I don't. No.
Government is a parasite. Not agreeing with that.
Very nuanced question. I think I'll say the quick answer would be no. I think the government's made up of people who are all trying to individually do the right things, but might collectively do the wrong things sometimes. I'm just not the same kind of fiscal libertarian that.
And the last question: do you believe that the 401k, IRA, and even the Roth system, that in our lifetime will come under siege and the rules will change, that will potentially hurt people in the long run? Do you believe that that's doable, or do you think that's on the radar and that will happen?
It seems unlikely just from what I've even seen, and maybe I'm having a short-sighted with the current administration, but like it seems like I know that people say like, oh, I bet taxes are gonna be crazy in the future. It seems like every president, whether it's Democrat, Republican, they're always trying to find ways for tax breaks for like the majority of people. Touching like the 401ks or Roths is like, it's kind of like a middle class attack. I could see maybe like income taxes being raised on like, the higher income
I got to take on this. I got to take on this, and then I'm going to hand this over to Dom.
Please do. Yeah. But I don't see it being likely. Just because and even Roths and IRAs get phased out the higher in income you go. So I see, if you have really high income, maybe I could see your wealth coming under attack, but like middle tier income, it just seems unlikely.
So I think directly taxed could be problem, but there's nothing. Everything's on my bingo card when it comes to government. Just an FYI. What I think is very likely is we look at things like Social Security, other government handouts, just different aspects of how things are tracked. I think it's very likely that money coming from Roths, 401ks, IRAs, that will affect you indirectly in some way. Like the fact that Social Security is double taxed is not right at all. I know that there's some conversations about changing that, but the fact that Social Security, you have to pay $1 of tax on that is straight up theft, in my opinion. And that we're already seeing that. And so, yeah, I think those are the aspects, and this is what happens all the time, is they'll be like, hey, if we actually tax a Roth IRA, this could be problematic, but if we include it in the overall tax bill, then like, are we taxing it? No, but indirectly it's bumping you up into a place that you might get less benefits. I very much see that happening, and I think that's very much on the bingo card when it comes to the government needing money, because right now we're fine. I mean, we're not, but I guess we're fine. But if we really get to a dark place in our country, I think all bets are on, and it's like, hey, what's worse, starvation or justifying something? And so that's my take. I think it's one thing if someone goes after it directly, like, hey, we are now taxing your Ross. I think that could be problematic, and I think there's a lot of other creative ways that they can, you know, like a parasite, take that money. And I'm not saying the government's a parasite, but I think it's an interesting word analogy. So Dom, you've been quiet for a while. I want to hear your take on some of these matters.
Amazing. So I'm going to start with the first question that you asked, Austin, because it gives an overarching thought process around just the Willie Sutton's law. You asked, Austin, do you think that wherever wealth is accumulated, someone will try to steal it is a good mindset to have? Austin said yes. I think that's a terrible mindset to have. I do. I think it's terrible.
I'm going to disagree with you, but I want to hear your take.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think by having that mindset, you get in a place of paranoia and scarcity. And I'm in the mindset of having abundance and seeing, quote unquote, the best in people. I think that it's good to be aware, right? But I do know what it's like to have this fear and the crippling that it can have on you by thinking the government's after me, people are after me, I built this wealth. You just shrink and you no longer expand. So go ahead, share your counter. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, again, it goes back to, yes, it's when it comes to abundance versus scarcity, we should have an abundance mind. And I like to think of myself personally, like I'm trying to be an optimist and a pessimist at the same time. And where I become pessimistic is I have very low expectations of the system, which makes me better at dotting my I's, crossing my T's, asking better questions, and just having this mentality of like, hey, you should do proper planning when it comes to liability. You should be aware of some future like wherever your money is, there's future ripples. And so I hear what you're saying is like, you don't want to be paranoid. You don't want to be miserable. We know a lot of people that are in the libertarian camp that are always miserable. They're always like, just angry humans. And I'm not saying that that's what you should do, but I actually think it's a really good mindset in the back of your head, wherever you're putting your money, being like, okay, how easy could this be to lose? And that has made me a better investor. And maybe I've passed up on some things I shouldn't have, but I've avoided some mistakes and short-term thinking because of that due diligence. I very much think of it as a due diligence. I assume like in every deal that I do, how can I lose money in this deal? And I think that mental framework is a similar here. It's not very abundant to think, how am I going to lose all my money? But it helps me make better decisions. And I think we're so often so trusting in areas that we maybe shouldn't be trusting.
Yeah. I think for me, it's the way that it's framed. I just think that, to me, I see it more as a game. You understand the rules of the game, you play the game, and you essentially do the best you can to win. I'm not going to look at it as like, oh, everybody's out to get me / the scarcity mindset. It's just like, I have education that I understand that these things are in place and they're happening. So yeah, I'm going to do my due diligence, cross my I's, cross my T's. But by doing it in that way where it's, hey, I'm educated, I'm going to play this game, it doesn't create this scarcity pessimistic thing. It's like, hey, I really like just learning now because now I'm going to implement things that nobody can take my money from me, more so than like, somebody's trying to steal my money from me because I built this wealth. So it's just, we're talking about the same thing. The way that I view it is just so different. I'm a very half glass full type of guy. So
yeah, which I appreciate that about you.
Yeah. Something that I just want to say real quick that I was just looking at it because someone we've talked about in the past is there's the line in here that talks about lawmakers create problems by spending money that they do not have. I just looked at the debt clock right now and it's like up to like $37 trillion or something like that. It's like absolutely insane. And like, just to put that into perspective, it's like if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you 101 101,000 years to spend that. 101,000 years every single day to spend $37 trillion. So it just was like mind blowing to just put that into perspective on how much money that actually is at this point in time. So I think Nelson's whole point of this chapter is really just to have people be problem aware of like, hey, maybe it's not the best thing to put all of your money in a qualified plan and give it to the government. And maybe you want to start shifting it to something different. And at the end, he essentially says, this is what I don't necessarily agree with. The solution to all economic problems is essentially putting it in dividend paying whole life insurance. And I do agree it's an amazing place to store money, but I definitely don't think it's the solution to all economic problem solving.
Hey, it's Caleb Williams here. I'm just interrupting this video quickly to invite you to check out our And Asset Vault. You may have been there. We've actually revamping it. And if you are somebody that wants to learn more about, is life insurance the right fit for me? Does this And Asset make sense? Like, does this actually help me be more efficient? We've put together a 10-minute documentary style video that I think does a really, really good job giving the history, why the And Asset, different setups and designs that we use. And then we have an And Asset Vault that gives like case studies, calculators, handbooks, and so much more. We are here to serve you, whether it's a conversation, whether it's education, or the video. So make sure to go check out andasset.com/vault to learn more.
Right. The pushback to that statement is if the government just goes and steals people's money, like straight up, we're still living with our citizens. And so the idea of just saying, I'm going to be fine, but everyone around me is going to have no food, is like, that doesn't work out well. You know what I'm saying? So it's like there comes to a point where there is an aspect of like, you got to bet on America. And let's just say the market drops and it just goes like, everyone loses all their money. That's not a great thing, like period, because you're creating massive chaos. And you can say all the mindset stuff you want, but at the end of the day, massive chaos is not good. And so you could have all your money in gold and all this stuff, but it's like now it's like you have the wealth.
I could disagree with that in some aspect too. Like, I think if the market actually tanks and drops pretty drastically, I think there is positives. Inflation eventually comes down, interest rates come down, and you essentially get a reset to essentially like create new beginnings. So, I just want to
which leads us well into this next, the golden rule. But the other thing that I'll say, because I'll just give my take on do I believe in Roth IRAs and using qualified plans? Here's my take. I'm going to take a very middle of the road take, and it's the word diversification. I think you should be diversified, not just in the risk of where your money's being invested and how it's growing, but I think you should be diversified on who's controlling it, who you're entering into partnering with, and so that's very my take.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like Roth IRAs. I'm cool with people doing Roths, but I think it's a good mindset to have to say like, hey, like I'm not assuming that it's all going to be good, and then deferring your money. We both know, like, you're partnering with a government who's spending money that's out of control that can change income tax. Don't love that. But there's people that defer their money and have a strategy, and they feel like there's a risk in anything that you do. And I will say, out of all the things on this card, if this is a big hot button for you, this is a big pitch to why a whole life insurance contract with a mutual dividend paying life insurance company would be really high on the list. And if everything hit the fan, insurance companies are going to be the last to fall, but to say that they won't fall, I think is, again, pretty ignorant and doesn't show a lot of humility. I think they will be one of the last institutions to fall, but if everyone's panicking, we have bigger issues. What are you guys' takes on my take on the Roth versus 401k? Like, personally, I'm not deferring any of my money in qualified plans. I'm not anti-Roth. If I could qualify for them, I would do them. But I think diversification of where our money's at is the key, and not just looking at where our money's invested, but diversifying the tax aspect as well.
Amazing. So the reason why I said interesting is because you use the word diversification as a thing that you believe in. And if you talk to most wealthy individuals, they would argue that diversification is not a great thing to do. It diversifies knowledge, it diversifies resources, it diversifies a lot of things, versus pouring everything into one bucket will actually create more exponential growth. So that was the reason why I said interesting. I do know a lot of financial advisors, people in the space, they do talk about diversification and like different asset buckets. I've talked to other of our friends. That's what they believe in as well. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that at the end of the day, but I understand that what the question you asked actually ties into that is that there is no black and white answer for this. It's like, should I do a 401k? Should I do a Roth? Should I do life insurance? I don't know. Should you? Like, it really comes down to, again, what do you want out of life? And I have, okay, we can go, do we stop? Good. I'm willing to pause. Go ahead, Caleb.
No, I just going back to diversification, there's a difference in how you make your money and then where you save and invest your money. And so the example would be like putting all your money in one stock. Certain stocks have done really, really well, and then certain stocks and companies don't exist anymore. And so the aspect of that is, there's aspects of diversification that are different, but when it comes to investing and saving my money, life insurance itself is extremely diversified. When you look at all their holdings, you're not insuring one person, you're insuring thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And so I think, in our business, we're not serving one person. We want a diversification of many different people that create. So I think the law and principle of diversification is a strong one. What I'm not saying is that that's how you should go make your money. That's not the advice I would give someone. I would give them, go all in on yourself, figure out how you create value and all. But there is something to say that the more money you make, diversification is something that you should be well aware. So I stand by what I said, but I do appreciate the pushback on that, because I think,
No.
yeah.
Yeah. And to follow up with that, I would say that it becomes in like your bucket size. So like if you're in the stock, putting all your money in one stock, probably not great. But becoming an expert in stocks and diversifying within that asset class is great. Just like real estate, putting all of your money into one thing versus like many different real estate properties inside of the asset class of real estate. To me, it's still centralized, but you're diversifying within that centralized bucket. So you said something about business, one client, many clients, it's still business at the end of the day. But I do think that there's a point where it comes to like, people always have the conversation around passive and active income, and people always want to go for the passive income side of things. Well, you obviously have to create active income first before you can go into passive income. And most people that create real generational wealth, their active income is very superior to their passive income at first. Then once they get to a point where their active income is so much, and they're like, well, it makes more sense now for me because I don't have as much time and energy to actively do any more active income. I now put all of the overflow to the passive income side of things, which would then start the diversification conversation. So it's go all in on the one thing, build wealth, create it. Then once you make a certain amount, then go to the passive, then go to the diversification, to then go into other asset classes, is more of the headspace that I'm in. And again, there's no right or wrong answer for a lot of this. You asked the question, what do you think about Roths and 401ks? Again, I think it really comes down to the human, the person, what they want. Like if you're somebody that values control and you're putting money into your 401k every single day and you're 30 years old, like to me, it seems like the most maniacal, insane thing you could possibly do. It's just like, it actually makes zero sense, even from just the logical perspective. I'm like, I just give that look. But I also have empathy because that's what we're told to do. So that's why we do it.
Yeah. You jinxed us, Austin, because you're like, yeah, this episode's going to be really short. And then we're already, we're only 2 chapters
minutes.
in, and
but
this is really good. I would love to hear you all in the comments. What are your take on, so far, Parkinson's law, but more importantly, like, what's your take on government? Would you call the government a parasite? What are your thoughts on the IRS being the biggest thief in the world? I want to know your thoughts on just your take on qualified plans. And we read every comment, and also your comments help us make sure that we're talking about the things that are relevant. So I'm going to move on, unless any of you have any
one more thing. One more thing on this section,
Austin,
because I have strong feelings on this section. So for those in the comments, they're about to hit us up and just absolutely eviscerate us. If you kind of take the very libertarian kind of bend of Nelson Nash here, and you're like, oh, like, government is a parasite, and where wealth accumulates, somebody will steal it, and then really like the end of that thought is like essentially like a stateless society. Like, well, we need to have no government, and I think that all of us here would agree that like some government is a good thing, and like ultimately, like unless you are like historical examples like the Kurds of Afghanistan, the Roma of Europe, like people who don't like, they're like a diaspora who don't have like a specific geographic area really. Um, they don't have any centralized government. They don't have anybody to like settle disputes between them. And if unless there's like a strong bond of like customs and norms that are tying, one second, unless there's a strong bond that's tying like everyone together, then like you really need a centralized government. So I think what we're all saying is like, okay, like we need the government somehow, but like, how much are we going to trust the government, right?
Yeah,
And so
here's my
yeah,
take on that, Austin.
mhm,
The government's not going anywhere. So
yeah,
all the people that want to debate this
yeah,
magical world, it's just not going to exist. So we got to play the
yes,
game. So I take more of
yes,
like the game. It's a game. Let's play it
hmm,
well. Let's play
yep,
it so it favors us.
yep,
And anyone that wants to make a would we build roads stuff? It's like that's just not a reality. So we could debate all day long, but we're in a
hmm,
system with where we are.
yep,
So I appreciate that
yeah,
take, but that's
yes,
it's just more of a practical deal. All right, so
yes,
the golden rule. Love this. I love this. This is probably the most memorable thing from the Becoming Your Own Banker book. The moment I read it, it stuck in my head, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom there. And it's simply the golden rule are those who have the gold make the rules, and that can rub some people the wrong way. Is that a true statement across the board? Maybe not, but it's pretty powerful when you think about control. And one thing that Nelson cares a lot about is control. Who's controlling the pools of capital and all. So that's really central. He talks about savings is in the same as creating capital. Like that was really big for me, and that was one thing I picked up when I reread. I'm like, okay, saving is in the same idea of creating capital, and you're like creating a pool of capital. That's interesting. That it highlighted that. And then the story of Panasonic and the Mexico story of like Mexico is being all like this is how you have to work with us and making it really really hard to do business. And then it's like peace, we'll go do it somewhere else. Which again we could get into politics and say like, is this what happening in certain states? Certain states want to tax and create more regulations, and you know there's might be a reason why people are leaving. And so that's less maybe about insurance and more just about Nelson's he couldn't help himself to create some political jabs. So anyways, I could miss some things, but those are like my big three takeaways. Dom, we'll start with you. The golden rule.
I do really like the chapter as well, and I think that there's some sound principles in here. The first one that I think when I was reading it, I was like, wow, that's really good. It says the common man has been so infatuated with living for today, and that the importance of saving, of creating capital, is all but lost to value, which essentially says that man is a slave to their pleasures and their desires of the world. And by being in the world and being a slave to it, you spend more than you create, and you're no longer a value creator, and therefore you never have any money to save, which shows based off of the debt that we're in as a society, credit card spending being at all-time high. We're just essentially a victim to our flesh at the end of the day. So for me, I thought that was really good. I really did enjoy the story, like you mentioned, of the Japanese versus the Mexican outlook. The reason why I think that is very powerful for the average person is that, especially when you're younger days, is you should really take this story to heart and be willing to make less money earlier on, and to be willing to work hard, even if you have to lose some money, to then break even, to then essentially make more money, just based off of the mindset that the Japanese have, right? They talk about how they build businesses. The first 5 years, they lose money. Next 5 years, they invest everything back into themselves, quote unquote, their business. And then the next 5 years, they essentially start taking money out. And if you have that same mindset of like, hey, I'm going all in, I'm gonna learn some skills. Next 5 years, I'm gonna start being like break even, keep pouring into myself, and you can start reaping the rewards and the benefits of it. That's where you will start creating real abundance for yourself and no longer live paycheck to paycheck or just above your meat. Like at the baseline, you'll actually start creating real value for your life. So, and then the last thing that I want to point out that I thought was incredibly powerful, that's undervalued when it comes to financial planning, investing, all of these different things, is he says large amounts of cash on hand, all sorts of good opportunities will appear. And I think that people undervalue the power around liquid capital, liquidity, and building real wealth. And I do stand by this, and I say this often, that a lot of people build significant wealth during some of the downturns, whether it's COVID, 2008, whether it's 2000, when things are at chaos on a discount. If you have the capital, you can control the rules, right? You essentially buy, let things appreciate, you get the real value from it, and you create generational wealth. Most people aren't patient enough to just sit in cash and do nothing. Therefore, they can never create real generational wealth. They just DCA to creating just enough to essentially not have to worry about retirement.
It's my favorite take so far of yours, Dom. Love it.
I don't have many, so I'm glad that you finally liked one.
Out of all the good takes you've had, that's my favorite one. Austin.
Man, can I just double click on Dom's for a second? Like,
yes,
I think
you
Dom,
can.
I think he just laid it out for us. He who has the gold makes the rules. And I think what you said earlier, Caleb, also, this wasn't Caleb, this was Dom. What Dom just said very much applies. Is like, you might lose money the first 5 years. Like don't get it in your head that you need to be, making like wild amounts of profit really early on. Because, you might just need to apply yourself, build up the skills, the head knowledge, and that's going to whatever the business venture you're in at time, if you build up a mindset where you're investing in yourself, you're, learning skills, you're applying them, you're getting good about saving, like that's going to carry no matter what your business you're investing in, no matter what your career is, that's going to kind of carry you far into the future. So I really like that about this chapter is ultimately that, hey, like it's the long term. We want to be thinking extremely long term with everything that we have in here. And just with the people that I know in my life, there's when I see just the way that people have their habits around spending money, I see there's a certain mindset that which might even which is looking for quick fixes and quick gains. And, you see it play out in small everyday decisions. And it's if you, for instance, if you just didn't go to that gas station to get your breakfast every day, by the end of the year, you'd have an extra, $1,500, $2,000 or whatever. And so I think it's just once again, small, tiny decisions that you're making every day that are going to really impact you moving forward in your, essentially the financial situation that you find yourself in for the rest of your life. So yeah, love it. Make sure to have liquid capital on hand because you're going to have opportunities that you could not have dreamed of.
Yeah. The Psychology of Money, which is one of my favorite books, talks about the idea of 0% being worth more than 0%. And it's a similar take on having access to capital creates peace of mind, but it also is a magnet for all kinds of things, which are not all good, by the way. When you have money, you'll get a lot of good ideas and good opportunities, but probably, a lot more bad opportunities and bad ideas. And so it's not a straight up solution and fix, but Warren Buffett has been criticized in the past by having a ton of money on the sidelines, and you could easily say look at it, you're missing out on what you could earn. And in his mind, and his history speaks for itself, he's been able to use that to be able to take, buy things at a crazy discount. And it just goes back to, you have your 401k, SEP IRAs, and all those things. There's more control and friction to getting that money. And so you might be getting a tax benefit, and who knows if it's actually a benefit in the long run, but your money is more locked up. Your money's more locked up, and there's a cost to that. And this is a mistake that I see a lot of entrepreneurs making, is they're making money and they're inflation, I got to get my money to continue to work for me. So they're constantly busy. They're busy bodies with their money, and they're more stressed, and they're making okay deals. They're potentially losing money, but they don't have a position of cash to be able to say heck yes to something in a powerful way. And this is one thing that our business has benefited greatly from, because we've been able to sit back a little bit and not have to play week to week. There's a lot of business owners that are playing week to week or payroll to payroll, and that's a lot of stress, and it's hard to play long-term games. And I would argue that having an emergency fund and an opportunity fund that has liquidity gives you the ability to create a volatility buffer on opportunity. And I'm a big fan of this, and I think I need to almost balance myself out because sometimes I like being too much in a cash position, and that's not always right. But I think even where your money's at, because if your money's in a brokerage account, it's a lot easier to access than if your money's in a SEP IRA. Doesn't make one right or wrong, but the golden rule is highlighting one area. So I love this that Nelson talks about this, and this is one thing that, again, going back to the power of whole life insurance, is sometimes it feels not sexy and all, and it's like my money could be over here, but it's not bad to have a pool of capital. And it's not fair to also say over the next 30 years you're only earning 4%. It's like, well, you're assuming nothing's going to happen over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And if you hit one home run, it could change everything. And it's easier to hit that home run if you have the ability to say yes.
I think the thing that I grabbed from what you said is that we don't value enough the power of a rate of return that's not tied to a percentage. And I really love that, because when you start looking at using your policy, your life insurance policy, we advocate very heavily for when you borrow, if you're borrowing at 5%, you go get an activity that's a greater return than the 5% you're borrowing at. If you're looking at it mathematically, anything greater is better in theory. But when you start, we're not a huge fan of using it for buying cars or expenses or anything like that. But let's just use an example of like, hey, I don't have any other money, any other sources, right? What if I absolutely need a reset in my life because I'm stressed out, high anxiety, my family and my spouse, we're not in a good place. I'm going to go borrow from my policy, get 0% return, if not negative, in the quote unquote dollar amounts, but we're going to go on a vacation. And it's going to allow us to reset, rethink, talk about our family values, and get back to normality to where then I can be more abundant back into my life, which will then create a greater rate of return dollar wise. And so I think you can't put a dollar amount onto stress, peace, creating that peace in your life. And we talk about this all the time when people are like, hey, I want to pay off my house early. You talk about the math, you show them the math, like, hey, mathematically it doesn't make any sense to do it. But when you start having the conversation of like, well, I just don't like the debt and it puts me in a better place, I'm like, okay, as long as you know that mathematically you're not going to be better off financially, efficiently, there's a better way, but you understand that it'll put you in a better, peaceful mindset and you will have a higher quality of life. Well, you're living intentionally now, and that's all that matters. And I can't argue otherwise for you.
Yeah. Quick, I'm gonna jump in there quickly. So Dom, and I think this is once again where it ties into I think Caleb called it the first day. It was like this whole mentality of infinite banking, overfunding life insurance. It's like a savings plus. Like it's a really fancy way to like trim down the amount of unnecessary expenses in your life and save more. It's just a really, really interesting way to do that. Now, when you say like, hey, I want to go on this vacation with a family, it's going to bring me peace of mind and an abundance mindset. I think bringing in this whole like the mindset of like cutting out unnecessary expenses, like could you accomplish that peace of mind and that abundance mindset by going to like, instead of going to the Maldives, which is like super expensive, super far away, could you just go to Pensacola? You know, it's like, and that's part of it is like, okay, if you're going to use it for vacation, like make it a vacation that's like not ridiculously expensive, but like still is going to be able to capture that abundant mindset that you're going for.
Hey guys, I just wanted to interrupt real quick. If you're watching this and have an index universal life policy, a whole life policy, have any type of insurance policy in general, and you're like, I want to know if I'm on the right track. I want to know if this is set up properly. We at Better Wealth want to help you. We want to give you a free policy analysis and show you, are you on the right track? Is there some things that you potentially could be doing better? And so we have a link down below that you will have access to. We would encourage you, if you have a policy and you want to see if you're on the right track, check that out. And if you're someone that's watching this and you're like, I want to talk to someone about maybe setting up a policy for myself, or I have questions, we would love to serve you. You can also see a link to have a call with someone on our team. Back to the episode. All right, I'm going to move on to the arrival syndrome. And this one, Nelson opens up and says, quote, we turn our attention to probably the most devastating matter that we have examined thus far. That's a big statement because there's been some bangers that we've covered so far. So this is according to Nelson, the most devastating matter. It's called the arrival syndrome. This phenomenon probably limited the achievements of mankind more than anything else. When this thing infects us, we stop growing, we stop learning, we rot. Exclamation point. We turn off tune out the ability to receive inspiration, because we, quote, already know all there is to know. I think he goes on to say, this is based off my memory, but just don't work with these people. and your life will be a lot more peaceful. Not anything else I'm going to add to this. Austin, what was your biggest takeaway from this chapter?
I loved, once again, he's going back to the Japanese, and he's making the comparison to how, you know, if, with American businesses, he was trying, there was this guy who was trying to sell them on his ideas. They're like, hey, we've already learned this, we're already doing this, like what do we have to learn from you? And then the Japanese, though, they were receptive, and now Japan is known as like this, is like a super high industrial manufacturing quality for all these products. And once again, like, and we see this, and not just on a socioeconomic level with like different societies, but we even see this like on a personal relational level. It's like, is there anything worse than having a conversation with somebody who knows it all? Like honestly, there's nothing, like, I can't think of a worse version of torture than to be trapped for like 10 minutes in a conversation with somebody who within the first like 30 seconds, you already know that, like, oh, they know everything and I'm stupid. And I'm just breathing the same air they are right now. And I should probably thank them for it, because that's how awesome they are. So like, and it's so frustrating to meet people like that. But ultimately, it's whenever we have like a mindset of like, hey, I have not arrived, I have more to learn. Maybe I can just be curious here, lead with curiosity, and see if there's something here that I haven't yet learned and that I could actually improve my life. Such a better mindset to have, both professionally and personally.
Love it. Dom.
Yeah.
In a simple perspective, I think that this really attacks the younger and the older generation, because I think when you're younger, you have this arrogance about you that you just naturally know everything. And then when you're older, you feel like I've already lived through entire life, so therefore I already know everything because I've experienced it all. Now, the middle, right? I think that they don't even get to experience this quote unquote arrival syndrome, because they've got to a place where they just lost all hope, where they just don't even, get to a place where they get to experience I've arrived, or feel that there is something that they could experience to create more. So for me, I think that what you brought up, Caleb, is like that one, the rule of six, definitely should have been put in this chapter for sure, because I do think that the things that like Austin said and that we're talking about, it's all around ego. It's all around pride. And, to essentially to die to oneself of like, hey, maybe there is more things that I don't know. Even if I do, quote unquote, know more than most, there's probably things that I don't know. And that's some of the wisest people that I've ever met know that even though they know a lot, they realize that there's so much more that they can keep learning in this world.
And you can learn from anybody. If you're someone that if you're someone that says I can't learn from somebody, you need to reread this chapter and hopefully humble yourself, because I have a mentality that I can learn from anybody. My Uber driver I'm not necessarily looking maybe for like sage wisdom, but you might be able to learn on some things to avoid. What is it? A smart person learns from their own mistakes. A wise person learns from others. And there's just so much here. And I also think if someone's unwilling to change their opinions on things, they have a pride to them. And I know people in the infinite banking space that are in this place. Like, they're so boom, my way or the highway, or boom over here, or like insurance is a scam. It's like anyone that says that permanent insurance is a scam. Okay, you wanna have a conversation? A scam, or like all across the board, is banks getting scammed every time they do it? Like, I don't know. So these are the kind of things where I feel like I've taken to heart and been like, you know what? I'm going to take a step back. Have I made comments and, have I made takes on my book that I don't stand by? Yes. And I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. And I think that there's a freeness that comes just as you an individual, but then there's a humility that says, hey, I'm doing the best I can, but I'm also wanting a better way. That's why I think our business, Better Wealth, resonates with so many people, because I think people know like there's better ways, and that doesn't make you not better. Like, that doesn't make you a loser. That makes this pursuit of betterment is really key. And part of that is just asking questions. Doesn't mean you're always wrong. Sometimes you're just validating, yes, this is why I believe what I believe, but it's the humility of being able to ask questions and learn from people. So love what you all are saying, and I think we need to remember this when we're talking to people, because there are certain people that we're never going to change. Like, people live their perfect life based on how they live, and so we can't change people. So sometimes we do need to just be like, you know what? I think your way is the best way for you, and I wish you the absolute best, and not have to feel like I need to justify my position. Just know, like, there are many people that think we are scamming people because we talk about permanent life insurance, and if we try to spend all our time trying to change their mind, we're going to be miserable, and we're never going to change their mind. Versus being like acknowledging them, and also being like and staying in our lane, and hopefully the people that are trying to do their research will resonate with some of the points that we're making, and we've seen that as a fact. Like, there are people that have come to us that appreciate our approach.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard to,
Go ahead.
with our approach. I feel like we take a really conservative, nuanced approach, and I'll say the people who are in our space, and maybe even people who, like, you know, like they get 100,000 views in their videos, it's usually people who take a really strong position without a lot of nuance. Like, it's really hard to get like a lot of traction really fast having like a balanced view, not like taking this extreme position, because the algorithm wants you to take an extreme position, because that you're going to attract more people with your extreme position than like a middle of the road centrist position where you're curious and you listen, and that you can see both sides of it. Like, you're going to find way more views and way more likes if you're going to go either to the right or the left on some issue than if you like try to understand.
I love it. All right, next chapter, use it or lose it.
Lose it.
This one is.
Did we bring Justin on for this one?
What?
We bring Justin on for this one?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. What?
Did we bring Justin on for this? Justin Gartman, our wealth coach.
What does that mean?
You know, we talked about the every time it's just the freak in the sheets, and now we lose it or use it. That's his nickname, right? We were supposed to bring him on for this episode.
Okay. Joel, you could keep that in or not. Sorry, I'm not. I feel.
I also was lost on that one. I didn't. I knew who you were talking about, but I did not get.
If we do choose to keep it, everybody has to go back and watch the very first episode to understand. It is completely 100% financially related. Somehow, some way, one of our wealth coaches got that name. I have no idea how. But now when things are related, it seems like he should be brought in. So
you know what's on Dom's mind right now. Okay. All right. Use it or lose it. And this one, and maybe you guys can do a better job summarizing this, but I highlighted two things that I'll read. So Nelson writes in this chapter, many are still caught up in the posture of thinking that the matter is a function of interest rates. That is a fatal error. It has to do with recognizing where money is flowing to, and the failure of charging interest to yourself for the things that you buy using your own banking system. Anytime you can cut out a payment of interest to an entity that you own and control, which is subject to minimal taxation. Life insurance companies do pay taxes. Then you have to improve your situation. So I'm sorry that I can't read, but that is maybe we can put this quote up, Joel. But he pretty much says anytime that you can cut out the payment of interest to an entity that you own and control, which is subject to minimal taxation. So essentially, my summary of that is: don't get caught up in interest rates. Flow as much money to your system as possible, and be willing to use your own bank. And if you don't use it, you will lose it. He also goes on to say, just like EVA, which is economic value added, to be effective, the infinite banking concept must become a way of life. You must use it or lose it. And my take on this whole matter is, I think there's wisdom in this whole thing. And I think, like anything, I still don't believe that going back to the golden rule, those who have the gold make the rules. I think that needs to be a function whenever you're making a decisions. And there are people that will use this chapter and say, I'm going to use my infinite banking stuff on my system for all kinds of things. And they actually put themselves less in a position, and they actually end up saving less money. And again, that sounds crazy, but like that is possible to do. If like you're paying, like, if your interest rate is a lot higher, and Nelson's saying it's not about interest rates, so I just want to acknowledge that. But if I could get a way cheaper loan and I'm saving more money in my bank because of that, my mentality is like, you should do that. And then my devil's advocate to that is saying, okay, Caleb, you're making the talking points that a lot of people make, like in a perfect world, but most people aren't going to do that. And that's one thing I'll acknowledge. There's something to say that you could math your way to debt, your way to anywhere, but at the end of the day, do something that creates momentum. Dave Ramsey uses the snowball method for paying off debt. That's not the most efficient way to pay off debt mathematically, but I will give him this: it creates the most momentum. And you're not in debt because of math. You're usually in debt because of behavior. And so they're like, create momentum, and this momentum might not be the on paper the fastest way, but it's going to be the most effective way because it's going to create wins and it's going to be able to help stack up. So I will say that I read this and I go like, hey, if you're sophisticated, the goal is to save as much money and control as much money as possible and have that compound over time. Whether you use your bank or use other systems, make sure that the thing that's tracked is how much money is flowing to your system. I agree with that. That doesn't mean that I'm going to use my banking system for everything, including refinancing my mortgage and cutting out the bank, because I actually think I would be less in control in those areas. But I do agree that the function should be how much money we're saving, and the pool of capital should be increasing every single year. And I want to do whatever is creating a greater pool of capital. So that is my maybe political answer. Please save me because I feel like I butchered this summary of this chapter. But that was some of the points that I took away from this.
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of if you're sophisticated versus not, so on and so forth. I think that using this concept for everything actually is a little bit more complicated than not. So I think that it creates a massive amount of discipline and is actually harder to follow through. So for me personally, I think that when people quote unquote potentially try to attempt this, they have a higher likelihood of failing if they're using it through everything. And I do think that the conversation around opportunity cost is mentioned in this book, really, and this is why people practice this concept. But when you start looking at the things that you're saying, is you're missing out on a massive lost opportunity cost of opportunities that present itself if you have your dollars being used for everything, such as cars, so on and so forth, expenses, because that liquid capital is no longer in your control. It's now spent and used for XYZ, and it's now no longer in your banking system used for the next opportunity. So for me, again, I'm not a huge fan of using it for everything. I understand what he's getting at, but I don't think that that's the best way, and I do think that there is a quote unquote better way.
I think and you said this in the beginning, Caleb, is that the use it or lose it mindset could easily lend itself to like a scarcity mindset. Is like, I have to use it or I will use it, because ultimately, like, that's not the case. Like, ultimately, you still are you still, even if you don't borrow against your life insurance policy, you keep the dollars there. You still have the peace of mind that comes with having liquidity and just knowing that you can totally jump into something if you want to. And I think that's still using it. Like, just because the dollars aren't out somewhere else outside your policy earning a return doesn't mean that they're not still providing you a benefit when they're inside your policy. So I understand what he's saying. At the same time, I do think that it's just because it stays in there does not mean that it's not bringing you a benefit or that you're using it.
Yeah. I think I can acknowledge that people that are purists and they do everything with their infinite banking, they over time are winning because they're sticking to a system. They're forcing themselves to save. Is it the most efficient? We could debate that, but it's like it's working for them. And I also would say that the idea of using, like, let's celebrate protecting your family, saving as much money as possible, making good decisions, and whether that's just the infinite banking system or whether that's the system of saving and being in the game. I think we could all agree that there's one thing about just debating and talking, and there's another thing doing. And there is something to say that if you're always just going to debate and never do, then you could always be right and not have these things compound in your favor. So I would love to hear your take in the comments on your deal. And if you're watching this whole thing, we appreciate you watching the fastest growing life insurance podcast. in the world. I'm just making up claims now, but you know, we like to. I think we can stand by that. Fastest growing. I mean, we're going from no show to a
Zero
show.
to
So
zero to
so
one. That's
yeah, I mean,
100%, baby.
like 400% if you
Infinite
include.
percent right there.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
literally.
so anyways, I mean, we appreciate the comments, the likes, the shares. It helps us, and we want to talk about things that you want to talk about. So last but not least, last chapter, which feels like it should be in the next section, but Nelson's slipping it in to get us excited for the next part of the book, is creating an entity. He goes into mortality tables. He goes he talks about not all insurance is created equal. Like obviously fire insurance, you hope you never pay, but death isn't an if, it's a when. You know, he talks about short pays and he talks about overfunding, which, you know, later in the book he uses an example of, you know, 40% base, 60% PUA, and a lot of people will take that and say like, hey, like this is the way that Nelson talks about. But I think he's pretty clear in this chapter the importance of getting right up to the MEC line. So he talks about that. And that's one of the things that I think we do really, really well. That's one thing that attracts people to us, is we're very transparent in how we design policies. And so I would say that this chapter and his philosophy is something that we try to do. He talks about, he does not endorse IULs. So if you're using an index universal life insurance policy and also parroting Nelson's infinite banking concept, Nelson would not be happy with that. I'm trying to think, but you know, those are some of the key takeaways that I got. He talks about PUAs. He also has a graph that we can show, Joel, if you want. He talks about, you know, single premium policy used to be tax-free. It's no longer tax-free. And so if you just put a lump sum all in year one, it's because it's considered a modified endowment contract. So there's some taxable consequences with that. But then he talks about, you know, getting a little line right to the MEC limit. And he talks about 20 pay policies and life paid up and ordinary policies. And there's something to say that back in the day, short paying a policy was a way of overfunding. He actually mentions that word overfunding in his book. So that's a way to do that. And then there's other riders like PUAs and other riders that we can use to overfund in an effective way as well. So that was how that chapter was talked about. And ultimately it's going back to like, okay, if we're going to create our own entity, where's the best way to do that? And he's making the point that dividend paying life insurance with, you know, in a free market is the best way to do that. So what are, I'll let this be the free for all. Who wants to take the next step?
Amazing. Well, I will share not just the concepts that he shared, but also my belief around them. So the first one that I want to just mention, he said, the shorter the payment period, the better suited it is for the purpose of the infinite banking concept. I understand, and this is for people that are like reading the book, trying to understand what policy design they should get, how they should do it, right? That's, I think, the main thing that people read this book for, is like, what should I do when it comes to this concept? How should I design it? I understand the concept now as I'm reading through it. And that's why they're probably here as well, to understand our beliefs, to say, okay, well, let me learn. Well, I understand what he's getting at, but I think when we have the idea of like long-term thinking and a place to consistently need to store capital, I think that having the ability to store dollars into this asset even longer than 10 years, 20 years, 30 years becomes a very powerful asset that you'll want indefinitely. And the longer you have it, the more money you're putting into it, the sexier it gets. And so I know that there's lots of designs that I've seen in the IBC world where it's like you fund for 5 years and then you essentially stop PUA and then, you know, just the base after that. And I'm not a huge fan of that because I think you limit the power behind it at the end of the day. So there's that. The other thing is he talks about multiple policies versus one policy. You can go into a whole debate around this as well. I'm not a huge fan of splitting up many policies for many different purposes. You can use, quote unquote, your one bank for all things if that's what you wanted to do. I think as your income increases and cash flow increases and you can no longer put any more money into that policy, getting another policy makes a lot of sense. But I think creating one policy for maximum efficiency, and that's what we're really talking about, is how do I create more money to my banking system? The most efficient way would be to just do one specific policy and start funding it that way. And the other thing is he talks about at the very end, he says, Kike, you kind of hit home on this, is the objective should be simply to get as much money as possible into a policy with the least amount of insurance instead of trying to put as little money in and provide the greatest amount of insurance initially. So Nelson Nash himself quoted it for every diehard infinite banking person out there. When you start having this conversation around the designs and people will argue like, hey, I should do 50-50 or 40-60. It's like, if you're really talking about what Nelson said specifically, right? It's either he's contradicting or he's lying or this is the truth. Like it's really hard to argue it because that's what the code said. And so it's one thing to say one thing, but then to back it up with math and design, I think is a whole other thing. So obviously the idea of snuggling up to the mech line, you can have a mech line that's very different depending on how the policy is designed. So it sounds good in theory, but if it's not designed a specific way, then it doesn't make much sense or beneficial at all at the end of the day. So those are some just quick things that I want to talk about. Is like, there's obviously some other things that I do want to mention with RUL, whole life, et cetera, like that. But I want to just stop there and give Austin or you guys to speak if you want to as well.
Yeah, I would say the devil's advocate could say the talking point would be the term riders are something that whole life has adopted that's not really great because it makes your policy less, I don't know, efficient kind of deal or like more risky on long term. And I would just say we could debate that all day long. So let's debate it with somebody and let's walk through the pros and cons of using certain riders. But yeah, when I read that, I was like, dang, Nelson's saying stuff that I think compounds very well for our philosophy. And there are certain people that are not a fan of some of the ways that we teach because they feel like, I don't know, I'm not going to say why they're not a fan of it. You can make your own conclusion, but I would be willing to go to the table and be willing to learn and talk about pros and cons. And then at the end of the day, if clients want to do a 40-60 policy, we will do that for you. We actually will be happy to do that for you as long as there's disclosure on what you could get. We're all for, policies as long as the consumer is in the driver's seat. And I think if you looked at the pros and cons, and the talking points, a lot of people would actually choose not to do that. But I'm sure that's going to potentially create a little bit of stir on the internet. And we're more than willing to invite anybody on that disagrees with that statement. And I think that alone could be a really, really cool episode for us to go through the pros and cons of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Austin, go ahead if you wanted to say something. I don't want to overbear.
Oh, no.
Now that we're talking about actual insurance, I have 1,000 things to say. So go ahead.
Okay. So just, I guess, a couple thoughts on the chapter, a couple thoughts on what you guys said. You mentioned, Dom, that, you aren't a huge fan of getting people multiple policies. And that's also, I say, generally speaking, that's something that I agree with too, is that there's not really a reason why why two policies would be better than one, for instance, if they're doing the same thing. But something that I do coach people through is I do think, and this is more of just a personal, when it comes down to behavior and becomes down to you and how much that you can essentially get behind the strategy long term, is I think that there's something to be said for getting a policy that's not too big for you to bite off initially, and that that you can handle, that you currently have the cash flow for, versus getting a policy that maybe you can grow into, which some people want to do. They want to be able to grow into it. But there's something to be said for being able to max fund a policy that's completely within your ability to, and then feeling really good about it. Like you're like, dude, I know that I love this. Even if it's like a 10K or a 15K, like, man, like I crushed that 10K and then I love it. And then if you like 3 or 4 years down the road, when otherwise you starting to second guess yourself and be thinking about maybe pulling money out of the policy because you're like, I haven't been able to max fund it like I thought, and money hasn't happened. Like if you had gotten a smaller one and you saw like a proof of concept that you liked, then it's a lot easier justification in the future being like, hey, I max funded this. I love it. The only thing that would help me love this more is if I could do more of it. It just makes all the sense in the world then to get another policy, just like what Dom said. But I do think there is something to be said for getting a policy you can handle and not having to really stretch yourself at least too much in order to max fund it. Because I think the goal of these, like Nelson said, is to max fund. Is you want to be able to go right under that neckline to put in shove in $1 to every single seat in that policy that you can, because that's going to be the most efficient.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with
Mhm.
that statement, and I think one of the things that Dom was mentioning is instead of just dropping off your ability to continue to pay after 5 years, and now
Yeah.
we have to start a new policy.
Mhm.
It's like no,
Yeah.
design it from day one so that we can shove in as much money as we
Yeah.
possibly can, and it's going to be more efficient in that first policy than having to set up a second policy. And so
Yeah.
I agree with you, by the way, and
Mhm.
it's a good problem to have when you're like have a first world problem of like I have more money, what do I do with it? Oh,
Yeah.
let's put it
Mhm.
into another policy. But if
Yeah.
the goal is every 5 years you start a new policy because we're dropping your ability to overfund, that's something that's not efficient long term.
Yeah. The only thing that you're recouping that way is like, yes, you are getting a cheaper cost of insurance because you are like, like the young, if you start now and you're, it's cheaper now to start than if you were to start in 5 years or whatever at a higher limit or whatever. Yeah. But ultimately, like, yeah, so I agree with Dom is that like ultimately design it the way that you want it to be instead of just like having this like 5 year sort of window or whatever. Because and ultimately when you do design it to be shorter pay too is you actually take away a lot of flexibility because you have a lot higher of a base than you would do if you designed it for a longer term. And so you actually are obligating a lot higher cash flow and not giving yourself any flexibility with that. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I don't want to get too technical, but I don't know if you're right on that. It technically, the shorter the overfunding period, you could make the argument that their base could be lower if you don't use term riders. But again,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah,
I
with
don't
at
want to
least
get
with
too technical. I could
yeah.
be, but
With
I think it's a non-issue if you if
yeah.
you overfund it with other riders and all.
Uh-huh.
But technically speaking, that's one of the talking points is like the reason we short pay this thing is because we'll be able to get a smaller base and we drop it
Mhm.
off and it rides into
Mhm.
sunset and it's like okay, yes, but it's like you're playing golf with 3 clubs, not 15.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
and
I'll
I
get
guess
That
backchecked all the time. Maybe we're not allowed to play with
yeah.
15 clubs, but you get the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, every time that I've designed like a 7 pay policy or a 10 pay or whatever, the base is always higher because you're having to pay it up sooner than if you
Yeah,
did a
that's on a
payday
short
delivery.
pay. Yeah, that's on a
Yeah,
short pay policy.
yeah,
But
hmm
and again, we're jumping ahead. Nelson's still going to recommend a PUA rider
hmm
as a way to overfund and then drop those. So it's maybe we got a little too far ahead
hmm
for the listener. So we apologize. That this can be
yeah,
something that we talk more.
yeah,
You're not wrong. If you
yeah,
just do a short pay like a 10 pay, that
yeah,
is a true 10 pay, the base will be higher.
hmm yeah,
amazing. Something that I want to add in this section is specifically a quote by Nelson Nash. And because we're talking about designs, 40/60 or whatever, right? I want to be very clear that we design policies specifically for what a person wants and their goals. Like it's not a blanket statement. And I think that we can agree upon that. It's like, shoot, 100% base. If that's meets your needs for where you want, like that's what it'll essentially do at the end of the day. But something that Nelson said here that I thought was just adds fuel to the fire, which is why we design things the way that we do a lot of the ways, is he says this will de-emphasize the immediate death benefit, but accentuate the banking qualities, the cash values. And here's the kicker. The irony is that doing it this way will result in providing more death benefit at the point where death will probably occur than any other plan. So essentially saying that by doing a lower base and higher paid up additions, what you will essentially create long term is actually more death benefit to be able to pass down to more generation because you have more dividends, more PUAs that go back into the policy, creating a higher death benefit versus if you just have just a higher death benefit, you will have maybe more death benefit up front, but when you actually need the death benefit, you will be better off at the end. So I get to practice the living benefits of the banking function early with a lower death benefit, and then I get more cash value early and later, and then you actually surpass the death benefit later on in life as well. So it just gives more fire to why we design them the way we do is because of essentially that quote right there as well.
Yeah, that's fun in presentations to show. Okay, first year, the death benefit's a lot smaller, but after year 30, you have way more cash, way more flexibility, better long-term growth, and the death benefit's greater than the original, and your chances of dying 30 years later are a lot greater. So I love that, Dom.
Yeah. And just quick ideas on ways what we would design for certain people. Usually when it's 100% base, we're doing things for maybe estate planning, estate tax, that type of conversation. And then when you start doing maybe the 40/60, you start to design it that way. So you have the ability to put more money into the future. And so by increasing the base, it allows you to have a buffer to put more money in. It may not be the max efficient, but it gives you the space to grow into that. And if that's what you want, because you're like, I know I'm going to make more money, I have a growth mindset, that's the way to design it. But if you're like, hey, like I want it to be overfunded, max funded based off of this split, well, then that's the way that we'll do it. So you have a conversation with someone in the team. We try to get the goals and what you want. So that way we can make it fit into what you want out of life. So just wanted to say that as well real quick.
Dom, is there anything else that you have on this section?
I do want to talk about just the last thing, because it seems like we're at the end of it, is just the thoughts on universal and variable life. And then at that point, it's the end of the book. So amazing. He mentions that in universal life, it should not be used for infinite banking. And I personally agree with that. I do think that if your goal is infinite banking, creating a banking system for yourself, that is something that you should not play in the playground with, especially with straight universal life. Even in IUL, I don't think it makes sense either. Now, he does mention things in here where it's pretty black and white statements that essentially like he would never buy a universal policy and it's like it's a terrible product, so on and so forth. And I think that that's where I disagree with strongly, in that I think that there's a very strong play for universal life for the right person. It's actually a very great permanent product for a very cheap amount of death benefit, and doesn't necessarily create the cash value that we're talking about now, but it does have a specific use case for the specific person. So when you read these, I don't want you, the consumer, to get locked in your head of like, these are bad products, but I want you to understand that they're just used for a different use case than quote unquote infinite banking. And it's the same thing with the variable life policy as well, is that using it for an infinite banking would be very risky, just from the idea of borrowing and having the, connected to the market and, cost of insurance and all that stuff into place. You could really lapse a policy likely if you're using it for that function. But having it for a permanent death benefit that you put it in a wrapper that's tax efficient, that still is exposed to market upside, can create a very, very advantageous asset for the right type of person. And again, it has to be very specific for the right type of person. And these insurance companies are getting better and better every single year as they're designing these products, that they're creating no lapse guarantees and other things like that. That maybe that when this was written 20, 30, or however long ago it was written, there was more riskier products because they just didn't understand maybe some of the nuances that were built into it. So I just think it's important to take everything with a grain of salt and understand that, there could be a use case for a lot of these products along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those people that want to jump on you, read the Arrival Syndrome. But what Dom's not saying is he endorses IULs for infinite banking, but that, like anything, there could be pros and cons of designs. And I think he's also been on record by saying there's been a lot more negatives with IUL and how it's sold and promoted. Agreed. And so we just want to acknowledge that. Guys, Austin, you jinxed us, dude. You're making me second guess. What the game plan was the next time we record together to do the next 3 parts. And I'm really second guessing that. So we'll talk offline. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you in the comments. We thank you so much for making what we do possible. And guys, I have a lot of fun going through this, jamming with you. This is just going to be a blast. And we get to show up every week and talk about these matters. So, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Man, the final thoughts is I'm 15 minutes late for a meeting.
There you go. Same. All right. See ya. Subscribe for more. And if you want us to look at your policy or talk to you about your current situation, we'd love to do that. There will be links down below. See you next week.